Translator, Reverie, Editor Henyi. After stepping into the tool pavilion, they found themselves standing within a vast hall, stone stairs coiled upward on both sides, leading toward the second floor. Judging from the towering height of the ceiling above, the entire tool pavilion was likely 5 stories tall, rising like a silent fortress of weapons. "What weapon do you use?" a voice suddenly whispered beside Ling Han's ear. Ling Han started slightly, then turned toward the others and asked, "Did you all hear that voice?" "I heard it. It asked me what weapon I use," everyone replied. Ling Han nodded and spoke calmly. "Sword! Shu!" Just as the final word left his lips, his figure abruptly vanished from the hall, as though swallowed by space itself, and reappeared within a sealed stone chamber. The door behind him was tightly shut, and it was clear that he had been directly transported here through some mysterious power. For an ancient dynasty, such spatial methods were hardly anything strange. Ling Han did not panic. From the situation before him, it seemed that everyone had been transported into different chambers according to the weapons they used. However, another question arose. Why were those who used swords not gathered together? This likely had something to do with their individual records. The better one's record, the more advanced the chamber they were permitted to enter. He swept his gaze across the room. It was a bare stone chamber, empty and silent. At its centre stood a stone table, and resting upon it was a sword sealed within its scabbard. Even without being drawn, Ling Han could already feel a terrifyingly vicious aura crashing toward him like a violent tide. The chi carried boundless danger. A swordsman's weapon! Ling Han was greatly shocked. It was not as though he had never seen treasured swords before. After all, he himself possessed a 10th-tier spirit tool, the Demon Birth Sword. Yet merely from the vicious chi radiating from this sword, the Demon Birth Sword could not even be compared to it. It was as though this sword had been forged for the sole purpose of slaughter. Ling Han stepped forward. Yet when he reached a distance of 3 meters, the sword suddenly slid halfway out of its scabbard on its own. About 30 centimeters of the blade was revealed, and Weng, 7 streaks of sword light instantly burst forth, intertwining as they shot toward him. The strength of those sword lights was only at the spiritual infant tier, identical to Ling Han's own cultivation realm. Naturally, he showed no fear. Crossing both arms before his chest, he chose to receive the attack head-on. His body was forced backward by 7 steps, and 7 shocking wounds instantly appeared across his arms, fresh blood gushing out. Ling Han could not help but feel greatly astonished. What kind of physique did he possess? It was comparable to 8th-tier rare metals. In theory, even attacks from the deity transformation tier would find it extremely difficult to harm him. Yet these were merely 7 sword lights at the spiritual infant tier, and they had already drawn blood. How could that not be shocking? Power did not represent battle prowess, and even less did it represent destructive force. Ling Han understood this principle very well. For example, using the same amount of strength, if one struck wood with an iron rod and compared it to striking wood with an axe, would the damage truly be the same? Power was only one component. Ling Han revealed a faint smile. He wanted this sword, so he first had to subdue it? Interesting. He himself was in the spiritual infant tier, and thus this sword was likewise limited to displaying power at the spiritual infant tier, battling him within the same realm. However, battle prowess was another matter entirely. The sword lights were saturated with terrifying destructive force. If his physique had still been at the Iron Sheet tier, forcibly taking that blow earlier would certainly have severed his arms, or perhaps even cut his body apart. Just like him, remaining within the spiritual infant tier, yet capable of killing those at the deity transformation tier. "Ha ha! Fighting on equal footing? Then let us compete!" Ling Han laughed loudly as he rushed forward. His interest in this sword only grew stronger. Could it possibly also be a 10th tier spirit tool to produce such ferocious sword light? Shoo, 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 shoo! Streak after streak of sword light flashed out, slicing toward him. Ling Han swung his fist to parry. The sword lights were incredibly fierce. Each carried power that had already reached the peak stage of the spiritual infant tier, and their lethality far surpassed that level. Even his formidable physique could be injured by them. But that was all. He cultivated the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, and his body was as unyielding as a diamond, his eyes fixed upon the sword itself. The blade was etched with numerous intricate patterns. However, these were not traces of martial intent. They were formation patterns. Although Ling Han's attainments in formations had not improved greatly, making such a judgment was still not difficult. This was not a spirit tool at all. Instead, it was the eye of a formation. Ling Han was truly shocked this time. Could it be that this sword itself was part of a formation that was actively attacking him? Pooh, 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 pooh. Blood continuously splattered across his body. This formation sword was simply too terrifying. It sliced him repeatedly until blood flowed without end, preventing him from drawing closer. He activated the Thunderclap Ninth Heaven and executed the Demon Fairy Step. No longer did he recklessly clash head-on with the sword light, for that would produce no results. In terms of pure power, this sword held the advantage, and continuing such a confrontation would only send him flying backward again and again. Shoo! Shoo! The sword lights continued to shoot out. Yet Ling Han moved freely through the narrow gaps between them, his figure drifting like a phantom as he steadily advanced toward the sword. When Ling Han stood only a single step away from it, the sword suddenly leapt completely out of its scabbard. A dazzling brilliance erupted instantly, soaring skyward as its baleful aura ignited. Each sword light multiplied sevenfold. A total of 49 streaks of sword light exploded forth simultaneously, weaving together into a dense web that forced Ling Han backward once again. Clearly, under Ling Han's pressure, the sword had also unleashed even greater power. Its cultivation realm remained within the spiritual infant tier, yet its destructive force had surged dramatically. Ling Han's arm was struck once more by a sword light. This time, the wound cut far deeper, nearly exposing bone. The sword hovered in midair as though controlled by an invisible hand. Then its blade slowly turned, the tip pointing directly at Ling Han, while releasing a chilling threat. What level of formation is this exactly? Ling Han stared intently at the formation patterns carved into the blade. He could not recognize this formation at all. Only two facts were clear to him. First, its power was terrifyingly immense. If it were to erupt with its full strength, it could likely slaughter even elites of the Shattering Void tier. Second, this formation was flawed and incomplete. Too shocking. An incomplete formation already possessed such power, then if it were repaired completely, how terrifying would it become? I will make you submit. Ling Han felt a surge of pride rise within his chest. He drew the Demon Birth Sword, yet he deliberately refrained from activating its martial intent. Instead, he executed Mysterious 3000, launching a counterattack against the formation sword. Ling Han feared that if he activated the Demon Birth Sword's martial intent, both swords might fully awaken. At that point, he himself would become nothing more than an ornament. Moreover, the Demon Birth Sword might not even suppress this formation sword, and if the opposite occurred, he would be finished. Just as expected, because the Demon Birth Sword did not release its full might, the formation sword continued to maintain power at the spiritual infant tier, yet the destructive force of its sword lights remained terrifying. Ling Han estimated that even if every student of Restore Heaven Academy joined forces, they would still be slaughtered by this sword. Ling Han unleashed his battle prowess completely. The Eye of Truth and Thunderclap, Ninth Heaven, were both activated, and the full strength of his physical body was pushed to its extreme. His battle power exploded far beyond the spiritual infant tier, even capable of slaying peak stage deity transformation tier elites. Yet when facing this sword, he could only barely remain evenly matched. No, more accurately speaking, Ling Han was still at a slight disadvantage. After all, this sword had deliberately suppressed its cultivation level to fight him, and it naturally possessed an inherent advantage. Ling Han refused to accept this outcome. Furthermore, the stronger this sword proved to be, the more he desired to claim it. He wielded the Demon Birth Sword in his right hand and slashed out a streak of sword light, combining it with the power of bone symbols. As he moved left and right, neutralizing the incoming sword lights, he continued to charge forward. Even if he was struck by several sword lights, he would still seize the sword with his bare hand. Without a tool spirit, once he captured it, he could store it inside the Black Tower. Suppressing it there would be far easier. Translator. Editor Henye. Easier spoken than accomplished. Whenever Ling Han drew too near, the treasured sword would erupt with even more terrifying might, sweeping down torrents of sword radiance that blanketed the heavens. One could clearly see that these streaks of sword light intertwined to form a formation, and the power of destruction multiplied within that pattern. It was difficult, extremely difficult, to contend with. To Ling Han, the weapon before him was like a hedgehog bristling with spikes. There seemed to be no place to begin an assault. No matter where he struck, he would surely be wounded in return. How could such a thing be suppressed? Ling Han knitted his brows tightly. His physique was sufficient, his recovery ability was sufficient, and he did not fear being injured by the sword light. Yet the real issue was that his power was inferior. The moment he approached too closely, the formation sword would unleash endless sword lights in every direction, leaving no path of evasion and forcibly driving him back. This was simply shamelessly unfair. How could such a weapon ever be taken? Ling Han activated the Eye of Truth, yet it proved useless. The sword lights were woven so densely that there was not even the faintest gap between them. Even if he transformed into a tiny fly, he still would not be able to slip through. There was no solution. Absolutely none. How was this supposed to be done? Ling Han pondered countermeasures. First, he could unleash the Heaven Transformation Bowl and directly absorb the sword. However, that would not be appropriate. Leaving aside whether the sword could even be absorbed, even if it could, the Heaven Transformation Bowl's function was to refine all things and extract their essence. Once this formation sword was absorbed, Ling Han had no idea whether it would become some divine material afterward, but the formation patterns engraved upon it would certainly vanish, and those formation patterns were precisely what he wanted. Then, how about trying the demonic pattern on his left hand? That mark came from refining the demonic chi of the Asura demon emperor. Small Tower had once said that it contained the power of laws, and its destructive might was astonishing. Even now, Ling Han had never truly tested its limits. Perhaps it could erase the sword light. Let's give it a try. He charged toward the formation sword once more and extended his left hand. The black demonic pattern surfaced upon his palm and pressed forward toward the incoming sword light. Pah! The sword light instantly shattered. It works! Ling Han was overjoyed and strode forward to claim this treasured sword. Yet, in the very next moment, the sword suddenly emitted an overwhelming killing intent, and vein-like patterns across its body lit up as the weapon fully awakened. Shat! A murderous sword that had completely revived was comparable to an elite of the Shattering Void tier. Now that was truly troublesome! Shu sword radiance flared like blazing fire, rushing toward Ling Han with ferocious killing intent. This was a murderous sword at the Shattering Void tier. Ling Han immediately hid inside the Black Tower. At his current level, he was utterly unqualified to challenge a Shattering Void tier elite. The wisest strategy was to flee. Having lost its target, the formation sword gradually dimmed and fell silent once again. Ling Han's expression turned extremely gloomy. The demonic patterns were part of his own body, yet the moment he used them, the formation sword had fully awakened and treated him with extreme hostility. It made no sense, utterly unreasonable. How could this sword ever be taken? Small Tower, what can you do? Ling Han asked. Small Tower swayed gently and appeared before him. With your current abilities, it is impossible to take that sword, it said. The formation patterns engraved upon it are shaped by the laws of this realm. Though incomplete, they have already reached a very high level. I only used the demonic pattern. Why did the sword completely activate? Ling Han asked in confusion. Because both are powers of law, so they stimulate each other, Small Tower replied. Then it added with disdain, they are merely the weakest manifestations of law. I could annihilate them with a slight shake. This fellow was boasting again. Ling Han shrugged and said, What's the point of you saying that? It doesn't help me retrieve this sword. Small Tower paused as though hesitating. After a moment it finally said, It's not impossible. What's the method? Ling Han asked in pleasant surprise. Taking its time, Small Tower replied, You cultivate the indestructible Heaven's Scroll and have already reached the Diamond tier. but so far you have only grasped the power of extreme hardness. However, a true diamond body is not merely stubbornly hard. It combines hardness with softness. Combines hardness with softness. What does that mean? Ling Han asked. Hardness alone cannot endure for long because it breaks easily. Pursuing the extreme of hardness alone is not the true pinnacle of defense, Small Tower explained. You have already reached the peak of humanity in the aspect of hardness. It is time for you to step onto the path of softness. How? Ling Han immediately grew interested in this subject, yet he did not rush to ask how to deal with the Formation Sword's attacks. Didn't you absorb blood-sucking origin gold? Small Tower suddenly asked. Blood-sucking origin gold is the perfect example of combining hardness with softness. It can be hard like metal, soft like fingers, and when subjected to tremendous force, it can even stretch to offset that force instead of breaking. Ling Han suddenly recalled something and said, I once punched Jia Ming, but his neck stretched a shocking 30 meters, dispersing the force of the blow. Yes, that is the union of hardness and softness. You have cultivated one side of the indestructible heavens scroll and achieved the diamond body. Within the same tier, no one can be harder than you. However, you have yet to begin cultivating the soft aspect. Therefore, in terms of physique, you are not yet invincible among those of the same tier, Small Tower said. Then how can it be achieved? Ling Han asked. Small Tower said, people and all living beings are composed of countless particles. The effect of any body-refining technique is to strengthen the toughness of these particles. But if you think from another perspective, the combination of these particles is not fixed, so why can it not be changed? Countless rocks can form a great wall, yet they can also be stacked into a towering pagoda. If the number of rocks remains the same and they do not shatter, there can be endless transformations. How many particles exist within a person's body? Countless, so the transformations within your body are also endless. That is the wonder of living beings. They possess infinite possibilities, unlike treasured tools or puppets, which are fixed and unchanging. Ling Han was instantly enlightened. Small Tower had not passed down any secret technique, yet it had opened an entirely new door for him, allowing him to glimpse a completely different direction. So the path could be taken this way as well. The hardness of the indestructible heavens scroll, according to Small Tower, should be the strongest in the world, manifested within the particles that compose the body. At the same tier, it represented the pinnacle of hardness. Yet, precisely because the body consisted of countless particles, the particles themselves could not be destroyed, but the arrangement between them could be altered. What he needed to do now was allow the particles to slide continuously when receiving an attack. Just like Jia Ming had done, receiving his punch and stretching his neck 30 meters to neutralize the force. Jia Ming had already begun to control the particles within his body. That was the manifestation of softness. Neither hardness nor softness could be lacking. Without hardness, no matter how soft you were, you would simply be like flour paste, easily torn apart by even slightly greater force. Without softness, even the hardest rare metal could still be refined. Otherwise, how would spirit tools ever be forged? Only by coupling hardness with softness could one become like blood-sucking origin gold, killing enemies when hard, yet coiling around fingers when soft. He sank into deep contemplation and used the eye of truth to observe within himself, exploring how to control the movement of the particles within his body. The indestructible heavens scroll contained related records, yet they were vague and difficult to comprehend. Previously, he had never understood them. But after Small Tower's guidance, that obscure portion of the scroll suddenly became logical, enlightening him again and again. He forgot the passage of time and immersed himself completely in this new realization.